Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Hey, let's say the guy down the block from where you live is counterfeiting money and he's buying stuff. He created an extension on his house. He bought a new boat. He bought a new car. He bought 5 new cars. He bought another new boat. He bought a lot of jewelry. He's living large. Would you say that the wealth on that street is disproportionately heading into that guy's house because he's able to counterfeit money and spend that money? Would you say that? I mean, that's not hard to comprehend, right? Stacy?
Yeah, we're going to talk about Cantillon effect and how that spreads down through a systemic form of discrimination and a systemic inequality, because this is an issue, obviously, that is spread around the world, with these uprisings about the George Floyd murder, which is spread around the world. And I think the underlying issue here is the monetary system around the world. That's the base of why everybody around the world is protesting, why this is spread around the world. And it goes to this little clip from the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jay Powell. Marty Bent posted this, and he said, "Deflecting blame, never a good sign. Individuals are waking up to the biggest scam to sweep Earth over the last century. The Federal Reserve, fix the money, fix the world."
Inequality is something that's been with us increasingly for more than 4 decades, and it's not really related to monetary policy. It's more related to, there are a lot of theories on what caused it, but it's been something that's more or less been going up consistently for more than 4 decades, and there are a lot of different theories.
Right. Well, let's keep in mind that Jerome Powell is a big shareholder in stocks, and he's the guy who gave BlackRock the job of buying stocks for his bank, the central bank. And he gave them the money to do so. So he prints a lot of money, he gives it to BlackRock, and then they buy stock in these ETFs that he owns, Jay Powell, and the stock prices go up, and he makes money with the money that he printed. That's interesting. So is he any better than the guy at the end of the block who's counterfeiting money in their basement and then buying lots of gold jewelry and cars and boats, and then you say, wow, that guy's got a lot of wealth? Yeah, he's just spending the money he just printed. Is it any different? No, it's not any different. Not at all different.
Now, let's follow up on that story that you've created of a neighborhood where one guy gets to print all this money, and he buys up all the wealth-producing assets of the town, the steel production company, the steel manufacturer. He buys the auto manufacturer, and he buys the actual underlying land to most of the property, so it has to, everybody has to pay him rent. And then people realize, then he gets found guilty of counterfeiting, but he just has to stop doing it, okay? But he still gets to own the wealth. His family gets to inherit the wealth, and they get to go forward. Obviously, they're going to be everybody else in the entire economy is disadvantaged against this guy because he inherited all this ill-gotten wealth. So that is part of the system that we have the problem in America right now with, the disadvantage that Black Americans have because of the history of slavery that then went into Jim Crow, which took wealth from African American, Black Americans. And so they came at the game. They started it, from 1964 with the Civil Rights Act. They started into this hyper-globalized American empire at a huge disadvantage compared to the average white person. But then from 1971, whoever had the assets got in first on the pyramid scheme. And so we're going to go into some of the charts on that.
So the way that this has played out in the Black community, and we saw that during the Katrina disaster, quite brilliantly laid out before our eyes. In that area around New Orleans, there's a lot of Black homes, ownership of homes. The Katrina disaster allowed predatory banks to swoop in, steal their homes from them based on the fraudulent loans that were made by the banks. And now who owns most of those properties? People like Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway. So here you had a disenfranchisement. It's one of the biggest disenfranchisement of the Black community in America since slave days. And how did they do it? They used interest rate apartheid. They used money printing, money counterfeiting. Jay Powell, whoever was at the helm of the Fed at that time, could have been Warren, could have been whoever was. I mean, they were involved in this wholesale disenfranchisement of this group. And this, you can make 50 examples of exactly the same game play from the same book.
Again, the game started, the pyramid scheme started, the Ponzi scheme started in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. So it's what advantage, how many hotels on the Monopoly game board did you own when the game started? And I saw a brilliant viral video where this woman was explaining, like, Black Americans had to work for 400 times around the board, the Monopoly board, building houses and buying properties for the white people playing the game. And then suddenly they're told, okay, now play the game. Now that we're 400 times around the board collecting properties, now you start to join the game. But on top of that, we have a systemic thing where anybody, so there are a whole bunch of losers systemically. The Cantillon effect, Jay Powell's in charge of printing money. He gets to print money. He presses a button. He said this on 60 Minutes. He prints money as much as he wants. It can only go to those broker dealers first. It goes to certain bankers first, and those bankers decide who to lend it to. I'm gonna skip forward to one with Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon, we all saw him take the knee in front of a Chase Manhattan Bank, right? But so he gets to decide who gets the wealth, who gets the free money that they've given, and they're charging interest on that free money that Jay Powell has just given him. Jamie Dimon takes a knee but won't lend to Black Americans in D.C. This is a headline from CBS News in 2018, and they pointed out that JP Morgan Chase rarely lends to minorities in one major U.S. city, Washington, D.C., the heart of power in America. Over 40% of the population is Black American. Just 2% of JP Morgan Chase's loans in Washington, D.C., just 2%. That's 23 of the 1,119 loans made in 2018 went to Blacks in Washington, D.C. Just as few went to Latinos there. This is the same sort of situation. It's like those loans in our fiat system of a post-gold standard dollar, whoever has the most debt gets to build the wealth with this counterfeit money and own all the assets.
Right, Jamie Dimon is part of the financial apartheid in America. There is apartheid in America. It's done with interest rates and loans and the banking cartel. And to kind of expand on this black monopoly idea, how come when blacks roll the dice on monopoly, it always lands on you got to go to jail? There's that jail.
Oh, yeah, true.
On the Monopoly board, you go to jail, right? Somehow when blacks are playing Monopoly in America, you got to go to jail again. Oh, you got to go to jail again. Oh, because jail is now a property development scheme by the likes of Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, where it's not for some kind of rehabilitation or some kind of part of the judicial system. It's a monopoly called the prison industrial complex, where blacks are now working for 50 cents a day and in fact overturn the amendment that outlaws slavery. It's alive and well in America's jails. Thank you, Black Monopoly, Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon.
Again, let's look at the big macro picture and how this happens and how a Cantillon effect creates the inequality that Jay Powell, at the top of the show, we showed that he says it doesn't happen. So correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, but this is pretty, strong indictment, I think. So here's a chart that went around this past week looking at the biggest theft in history, growth in productivity and hourly compensation since 1948. You see, compensation stopped growing in 1971. Productivity continued to increase. So that is a form of theft. Again, 1971, if you weren't on the playing board, if you weren't on the Monopoly board in 1971, working to get ahead then became harder. As you see from that productivity data, the more you worked, the more wealth you created for the top, the capital owners, the asset owners. The more you worked, the less you were paid commensurately. So you had to have been working before 1971. You had to have been, in a cushy job and built your assets by then. And we see that playing out with that data looking at Black versus white America in terms of their wealth, not their income, their wealth, the intergenerational wealth. The Black-white economic divide isn't just big. It's as bad or worse than it was before 1968. Let that sink in. Black wealth today remains less than 10% that of whites, just like in the late 1960s. White wealth surges, Black wealth stagnates. This is since 1960s. And you say Black wealth has stayed the same because the rules of the game, once they got on the playing board after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the rules of the game change with a fiat standard, the Cantillon effect that Jay Powell presides over.
Right, it's a soft genocide. of blacks in America. And since 1971, the white community has been trying to tell the black community that wages don't matter. Because they've been saying like, wages don't matter. Because of efficiencies and productivity gains, your car goes faster. So wages don't matter. Because of productivity gains and efficiency, your computers and electronic equipment that's made in China now, for the job that you used to have, it works better. It works faster. The screens are bigger and faster. That's why you don't need wages. Wages are bad. Savings are bad. The paradox of thrift, the savings glut, or having your individual sovereignty is evil, right? So that's the propaganda. And who comes the propaganda man is the Federal Reserve, the chairman. They say, wages, that's for chumps. What you want, you want counterfeit coupons from the central bank. That's what you want. And of course, nobody gets in the way and corrects them, because all the media that would stand up and say like, what this is wrong, have all been bought out by the same corporations.
But everybody's noticing, we see that in the Bitcoin community especially, we'll see that in the second half, that people realize that it's a rigged game. And yes, Black Americans came onto the playing board that is monopoly, this pyramid scheme, fiat pyramid scheme. Yes, they came in later than the majority of white people. But the fact is, it does discriminate against all. It is an economic paradigm that is rigged against the vast majority of people, including entrepreneurs, including people who are not like close to the money printer. That's why you're seeing protests around the world. That's why you're seeing central banks being burned down in Lebanon. There's the same underlying thing. It doesn't matter. I mean, this has been, this was an issue in the 60s. People, leaders of the civil rights movement talked about this economic, the system as corrupt. And this was while we were still on the gold standard. So it maybe wasn't as benignly corrupt as now.
Right, it is a global phenomenon because all the central banks are doing now on a coordinated basis the same thing, to move trillions from the many to the few. And so you have the global insurrection against banker occupation that we've talked about before. All these groups like Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, Arab Spring, uprisings in Greece, all over Europe, all over Asia, all over the world, they all have one common theme. It's interest rate apartheid, financial counterfeiting by a few to disenfranchise the many. And that's why gold is going up. And when you see the stock market going up, it's not because these companies are making more money. It's because the underlying currency that they're priced in, the US dollar, is collapsing. Because now it's the end game, as anyone who with two eyes can tell you. And as we go, I'd like to say, look up Gil Noble. He was a very famous black journalist from the 60s and 70s. That's what we need today. Somebody to tell it like it is. We're going to take a break. When we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Eric Latham. You can find him on Twitter at @IamTheCharacter. Eric, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Welcome, guys. Thank you for having me.
Now, you have gone viral on Bitcoin Twitter for a speech you gave at Black Lives Matter in Los Angeles. What did you say?
I told the people that it's time for us to opt out and exit the economy. And the way we do that is by using Bitcoin. I also introduced my 3-point plan moving forward. And the 3-point plan includes Bitcoin, volunteering, and voting. I feel that these 3 macro ideas can encompass a lot of micro ideas and moving the movement forward.
The Black Lives Matter movement, this is the latest chapter in the civil rights movement in America and the fight for freedom and emancipation and equality of the black community in America, going back hundreds of years. And I think we're at an inflection point where the black community has realized that as long as you're operating in the fiat money system, there will be no justice. And so Bitcoin is the first time in history where money and state have been separated, and you can become individually sovereign, which is a very empowering message. Am I right, Eric?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all other black activists were aware of, or if they had Bitcoin, they would have been all over it. I mean, it's the only solution. As Audre Lorde says, she said something to the effect that you can't dismantle the master's home with the master's tools, or she said something to that effect. And so we can't use the financial system that has actually enslaved us and oppressed us to rid ourselves of of oppression and the financial enslavement that we're in. So we have this new tool, and the boycott is a cornerstone of the Black protest movement, and Bitcoin is the nuclear weapon of boycotts. So let's put that in our toolkit. Let's volunteer and build our communities, and also let's not forget the ballot box. And when I mentioned voting, I also mentioned, let's get out there on the community level, like our neighborhood and city councils. Let's put all these tools together and let's rebuild. It's time to exit the ship, and let's rebuild. All is included, but especially the Black community, who is just under a tremendous amount of oppression in this country. We need, it's time for something. It's time to build with the strategies we have today.
It's the ultimate form of passive resistance. I remember back in 2008 during the financial crisis, the subprime crisis. Once again, the Black community was just absolutely decimated by evil bankers, that had basically stolen so many houses in the Black community around Louisiana, New Orleans, and those areas. After many decades of building up a strong community, suddenly, within a few months, it's all gone because of the bailouts for the bankers who made fraudulent loans. However, the homeowners who had built up a community, they were not offered any assistance. In fact, they were the victim of these fraudulent bankers, including the big names like Wells Fargo. One of Warren Buffett's big stocks was involved in this wholesale disenfranchisement of a whole community. So getting back to Bitcoin, Eric, it's unconfiscatable, which is great, right? Because so many times when the Black community achieves some level of financial independence, in North Carolina, there was Black Wall Street at one point. There have been really great, thriving Black communities in America for years, and then somehow they magically get ransacked, disappeared, memory hole, destroyed. But Bitcoin is unconfiscatable, Eric.
Yeah, so it's the same story, even with Reconstruction. There was this Black bank. There was this bank that the Black community, it wasn't a Black bank, I don't believe, but it was a bank that the Black community were leaving all their funds in. And the story, lo and behold, the bank gets looted. The wealth of the community gets looted, and it's the same story over and over again. Somehow we get taken advantage of because we don't have the keys to the printing press, or we don't have the keys to the bank vault, or some guy gets off free and clear with the money that we're storing somewhere else. And that day is over. It's a beautiful day. That day is over. We have a life raft to get on and to get off this sinking ship of the Titanic that we're trying to call society at this moment. And it's time to rebuild. And with these tools, it is unconfiscatable. It is ours, and it is a sense of self-ownership. And, that's pretty much the only way I can see forward. So as long as this idea catches on, as long as this idea keeps getting promoted, I think it's just going to be a no-brainer in the Black community as to this is the financial system we need to be using.
Thinking back to 1968, of course, I was around. I was watching the Olympics, and we had that seminal moment, Tommy Smith and John Carlos holding, presenting the Black salute with black gloves on the podium, the winning podium. They'd won their races. And this became an iconic image for the Black community going forward. And as far as images go today in the 21st century, in 2020, it's not so much those photos that capture iconic moments, but it's about memes, it's about Twitter, it's about social media. So how are you finding life on social media since this video dropped of you at the Black Lives Matter moment preaching the merits of Bitcoin? It has gone viral. It has blown up. What's been going on in the last week or so in your life, Eric?
Not much. People are just really appreciative, which I'm really appreciative about. I feel like it gave some win to the Bitcoin community. It was a reminder why we're all here, what we're all doing, and why we're putting so much time into this project. I also wanted people to, I don't want the message to get lost, though. I don't want people to focus on me. I want people to start figuring out how they can volunteer and spread this word, spread the Bitcoin word some more. Like, let's be Bitcoin ambassadors. Let's get out in our community and keep spreading this word. Let's keep this word buzzing. So it's been really encouraging. It's a great community to be a part of. And I actually had a meeting at the last Lightning hack spirit. I jumped in on one of Root Soul's, one of the guy who created the Raspberry Blitz, Bitcoin and Lightning node. And we were building on some ideas on how we can keep this idea going. So it's a great community of volunteers. I think it was reinforcing to the community why we're here, and everyone really appreciated that message. So I'm really thankful for that.
To my knowledge, and I've been in this community since 2011, I don't really run into any racial conflict at all. Wherever I go around the world, there's a Bitcoin nation, and it's multicolor, multi-ethnic, multifaceted, multi-country. Everyone's just focused on this hard money, unconfiscatable, really separation of state and money, and ethnicity and color never comes into it. But I do also live in the United States of America, and I agree with those who say that the foundation of the American political system is white supremacy. So it doesn't matter how open you are and how much love you have in your heart. If you live in a nation whose premise is white supremacy, that's going to be tough to overcome, in my opinion. Eric, what are your thoughts?
So that's the status quo. And how does the status quo stay in place with the financial system that supports it? So as long as we have this financial system that's ran by the Fed or, a couple mysterious guys in a room who we don't get to see, then we'll keep the status quo of white supremacy in place. And that's another reason why I promote Bitcoin to the Black community, because this is our tool to upend the status quo that's been oppressing us and literally has had its knee in our neck. I feel like if you upend the status quo, you upend the levers of power that keep that status quo in place, and therefore you can upend white supremacy.
Theoretically, as I've been saying since 2011, because I've been following this debate for quite some time, and the debate about reparations, and there's a lot of logic to it, and there's a lot to be said for it. What I said in 2011 is, and this is also quoted in Isaiah Jackson's book, Bitcoin and Black America, that the Black community, and this was when Bitcoin was $1, if it accumulated enough Bitcoin at $1, it wouldn't have to really worry about reparations, because the Black community would have all the wealth, and the fiat money world would be collapsing.
I mean, there's definitely the case for reparations, and that model has been done before. We know that the Japanese received an apology and reparations for their experiences when they were thrown in internment camps. But at the same time, I think we're so fed up that we're over it. It's just like, keep your money. We don't even want to deal with you anymore. We're done. We're leaving. You know what? This is your thing. We're out. And we have this new economy we can build. So, maybe when we're further enough gone, they'll try to lure us back and say, oh, we have these things for you. But, I just feel like we're so fed up. We're over it. We just don't even talk to us anymore. We're done. Bye. We have Bitcoin. Goodbye.
In the Black community, when this message goes out, what are some of the pushback that you get, if any? What is, this is Bitcoin got a learning curve. I mean, it's not the easiest thing in the world to wrap your mind around. It takes folks, you got to dig into it for a while. What are you finding out there? What are some of the objections or questions people have right off the top? Like, if you had a group of folks in a room right now, how would you explain it?
There's zero objections. I've been coming up with this analogy. So my analogy is, let's say the financial system is public transportation. So the financial system is a city bus. It sucks. There's no air. It never runs on time. And now you have this new system that's similar to Lyft or Uber, where all you need is your phone. And it's accessible. It comes to wherever you are, and it takes you to wherever you need to go. And I think people can understand that parallel to where you have a government system that's slow and sluggish, and then you have this alternative solution that's quick and nimble. So, but you're right. It's so new. That's the thing. When I think who are in the space, we forget just how new and innovative it is, that when you introduce it to people, they're like, oh no, that could never happen. And it's like, no, it is happening. So that's why when I present it to people, I'm telling people the revolution is already started. Don't be late on it. Let's contribute. But it's very new. When I introduce it to crowds, I notice there's this weird ambient silence because like voting and volunteering makes so much sense. And then when I introduce Bitcoin, they're hearing it, and it seems like they're hearing it for the first time.
In other words, where there's a need, you don't really need to spend a lot of time explaining it. For people in Argentina, for people in Venezuela, for people in countries around the world that are suffering from hyperinflation, they jump on Bitcoin right away because it fits a need and they get into it immediately. And this fits a need in Black America, certainly for individual sovereignty, dignity, justice. And we got to go. Eric Latham, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Hey, you guys are the best. I've been following you guys forever, so keep it up, man.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest. He's known as I Am the Character on Twitter, the one and only Eric Latham. You can catch us on Twitter at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.